respondent characteristics on schooling among children, among street and non-street children in Nakuru City, Kenya. Just give a brief, something small on the background that street children, I wanted to just to bring to the fact that street children could either be living on the street or entirely, or they stay on the street during the day, and in the evening they go home. And there's also information that street children on the streets are more than children of the street. There's that difference, children on the street and children of the street. The children of the streets are those who stay on the street during the daytime, and in the evening they go home. And that there's high unemployment rates among parents, abject poverty, and overpopulation, which leads to pushing these children onto the streets in many countries. Just to mention one, that's India, and very many others. The statement of the problem is that in Kenya, basic education is free to all members of the society, and that is provided in the Kenyan law, in the constitution, and even in the just in Kenya, that is it. And that many children on streets are at school going age, that's around between the age of 5 or between the age of 6 and 18 or thereabout. And that there's increased number of children, street children in Nakuru City. This is according to the street children census, the latest that happened in 2018, and that the street children are either school dropouts or on the verge of dropping. Most of them, especially those who come on the streets during the day, sometimes even after school, and they sometimes due to the pressure and very many other factors that they will come out in the study, are on the verge of dropping from school. Therefore, the children are the real problem here is that the children are blocking the achievement of the SDG goals, particularly number 4, that is the Sustainable Development Goals, which talks of education for all. And by the fact that they get to the streets there, they derail the achievement of that goal. Again, when these children are on the streets, they engage in begging and distortion of town order. So much so that even visitors, when they come, there is no peace. They, they embarrass everyone around there and all that. And the number of street children now rising in very many towns in Kenya is really worrying. And while they are doing this, their counterparts, that's the non-street children, are in schools enjoying learning. Therefore, the children's behavior, now their behavior and their characteristics were sought in this study so that they will be identified and establish if the behavior keeps the children in school or which one keeps the street children on the streets. Which behavior keeps those ones in school to keeps them in school, and which one keeps those ones on the street on the streets. Objectives. I have 3 objectives, or the researcher had 3 objectives. The first one was to determine the effect of demographic characteristics of street and non-street children on schooling in Nakuru City. Number 2 is to establish the effect of family background factors on street and non-street children on schooling in Nakuru City, and to examine the effect of location of origin for street and non-street children on schooling in Nakuru City. Now, out of those objectives, the researcher developed 3 hypotheses, and they're there. They'll come out in the chapter 4. The conceptual framework and the theoretical framework had the explanatory variables emanating from the objectives. That's the first one, is respondent demographics, family background factors, and location of respondent's origin. Then the outcome variable was schooling, which will be measured on nominal scale. And then the researcher would control for 2 variables, that is the street life pool factors and the street push to street factors. Then the theoretical framework, the researcher engaged the social cognitive theory. That's the theory emphasizes on the role of self-benefits in human cognition, motivation, and behavior. That was done by Albert Bandura in 1989. The methodology, the researcher used the comparative research design because it's the researcher intended to compare the schooling aspect of, or rather the characteristics of the children on the streets and those in the school. You look at the respondent, all of them combined together. So, but separately, those on the street and those in school, and identify which ones keep, rather, the ones in the street, what makes them to remain on the streets, and the ones in school, which remain, makes them remain in school. And the study location was Nakuru City. That's within the CBD, Central Business District, where all streets within the CBD and all primary and secondary schools within the township were targeted for study. The target population, according to the street children census in 2018, the latest, it was estimated that Nakuru CBD alone, the town alone, has an estimated 1,000. Actually, to be exact, is 1,005 street children, and look for an equal number of non-street children for comparative purposes. And there is the report extracted from the 2018 street children census that happened. That's on the left, and on the right is the exact place where the study took place. That is Nakuru town specific. Sample size and sampling procedure. Craig and Morgan sample determination table was used to determine the ideal sample size. And out of 47 schools that are found within the Nakuru CBD, 30 primary schools and secondary schools were identified, was sampled haphazardly. With the estimated 1,000 street children, using the Craig and Morgan sample determination table, 278 street children were sampled, and an equal number of street children, that's 278, were also sampled from the schools. So purposive sampling was used to identify both street and non-street children, with snowballing, or rather snowball sampling technique being used to identify more subjects. That's for the street children, like that. Then all the 5 children's officers were also selected for in-depth interviews. The total sample, we had 278 street children, 278 non-street children, and 5 children officers. So sampling error is as calculated there, which was 4.241%. The research instruments used here were the questionnaires with closed-ended questions and the interview guides for the children officers. The data analysis, the unit analysis was children of the age, I think this typing error should be 6 to 18 years. That's both street and non-street. Then the demographic data were presented in tables from which means and percentage were drawn. Then a binary logistic regression was run using Stata version 14, since the outcome variable is dichotomous or nominal. Validity and reliability. The content validity was used here for where the questionnaire was appraised by the supervisors to ascertain appropriateness and applicability of the content. Piloting was conducted in Nyahururu town, which is just the neighboring town to Nakuru. So look at the reliability. Actually, individual characteristics did not meet the minimum requirement of 0.7 Krobach alpha coefficient. However, all of them combined, the 13 variables combined, they met the minimum, that's 0.7119. Therefore, meeting the minimum requirement, the Cronbach alpha of 0.7, and therefore they were suitable for study. Data analysis and chapter 4, data analysis and presentation. Now, out of the 556, that's the response rate, out of the 556 respondents, or questionnaires dished out to the respondents, only 2 did not return, and these 2 did not return from among the street children. For the street children, the questionnaires were not being given to them directly, or rather they were not being given to fill, because some of them, because of the nature and all that, you would talk to a child when street child, when he or she agrees is when you fill the form. But however, because of the nature, there are some 2 forms which I remember very well that the street children ran away with. But however, those ones from the schools were returned in full, making it 99.6% returned, and only 0.4% not returned. Demographic characteristics of all the children who were interviewed, both street and non-street, 33.21% included the female, and 66.79% were male, meaning that the study was all the gender, the 2 gender, male and female, were represented in the study very well.
Cyrus, sorry, you don't have much time. Instead of dwelling on these on a lot of this, you'd go into the substantive findings. You don't have much time. Sorry.
Oh, very well guided. Thank you. I'll go straight to empirical results. Objective 1: estimating the effect of demographic characteristics of street and non-street children on schooling in Nakuru. Logistic regression was run, and the logit results were presented as shown in the table. However, for ease of interpretation, the researcher went ahead to obtain the marginal effects, where beginning with the gender, compared to female, 37.02861% of the boys were likely to be on the streets. And then compared to secondary school children, pre-primary children, or rather those who had the highest level of pre-primary education, had about 49% likelihood of being to the streets. And compared to, again, lastly, compared to compared to secondary education, 68.06816% were likely to end up to the streets of those used in the study. Then on the age bracket, we had 2 age brackets used here, was between 6 to 12 and 13 to 18. So compared to 6 to 12, 60.57% were likely, that's of between 13 and 18, were likely to end up on the streets. And this one gives the reason to why. And the reason was given by the street children officers, or rather the children officers in Nakuru County, who gave in that most children are actually still under the care of the parents, giving the reason to why there's a higher number of 60.57% of children between 13 and 18 who are on the street, or who may end up to the street. And as age arises, as age increases, therefore the probability of getting to the street, or the percentage of children getting to the street also increases. And to answer the objective 1, cumulatively, the researcher conducted the chi-square test was conducted to establish the relationship between the demographic characteristics and child schooling. So the demographic, the calculated probability was 0.0000, meaning that combined together, all the demographic factors do not jointly influence child schooling, which led to rejection of the null hypothesis. That the demographic factors do not jointly influence child schooling. Objective 2, estimating the effect of family characteristics of street and non-street children on schooling in Nakuru. In this, we had we had 4 variables: single parent family, both parent family, number of siblings, and then combined together with the number of meals per day. And the first two were being compared to orphanhood, or rather lacking parents. So compared to orphans, coming from a single parent family reduces the chances of ending up to the streets by 4.07867%. And that having both parents, as compared to orphans, having both parents reduces the chances of getting to the streets by 44.02%. And as the number of looking at the number of siblings, as the number of siblings increases in the families, the chances of ending up to the streets were 24.0696%. And having an extra meal looking at the number of meals, having an extra meal in the family reduces the chances of getting to the streets by 67.89503%. And the researcher conducted also a chi-square to establish the relationship between that's to answer the null hypothesis that family characteristics do not jointly influence child schooling. And the F statistic obtained was 0.000, which was less than the p-value of 0.05, which led to rejection of the null hypothesis as indicated on the table. Objective 3, estimating the effect of location of origin on street and non-street children on schooling in Nakuru. And again, we had 3. That's 3 variables. That's urban estates, urban slums, rural slums, which were being compared to rural villages, as compared to rural villages. So compared to those children that come from the rural villages, coming from urban estates reduces the chances of being on the streets by 55.2%. That's on the marginal effects, the third column. And compared to village, those come from village areas, when a child comes from urban slums, there's a reduced chance of 21.1% of, or the chances of ending to the streets reduces by 21.1%. And then compared to rural villages, again, those children who come from rural towns have a lesser chance of 44.6% of ending up to the streets. So this brings to the sense that the children who come from the rural villages are more likely to get onto the streets, and the reason corroborates with the response from the children officers who said that in rural villages there are no facilities, there is no food, there's a lot of poverty, and therefore which pushes the children out of school. And again, a chi-square was conducted to test the null hypothesis for this very objective, that is location of origin do not jointly influence child schooling. And the F statistic obtained was 0.00, which was greater than the set p-value of 0.05, which led to rejection of the null hypothesis. And this led to a conclusion that all the location of origin actually is significant in the location of origin is very important in determining whether a child will end up to the school. So
Cyrus, you have overshot your time. Kindly conclude.
Conclusion and recommendations. Conclusion: demographic characteristics. Actually, age emerges as a critical determinant of schooling, and the gender disparities are evident in both groups, with boys more likely to be on the streets than girls. Children with the primary education are more likely to join streets compared to those to their pre-primary and secondary counterparts. Then conclusion on the family characteristics is that children who are orphans are more likely to end up on the streets compared to those from families with parents. or partial parents, single parents. Then parental education and socioeconomic status play a significant role in determining a child's schooling status. Then families which have more than 2 meals a day are likely to have their children in school. Then location of origin, children who come from rural villages have a higher likelihood of joining streets, other factors kept constant. Then studies, knowledge contribution, they're there. We're talking about insights into vulnerable populations, talking about identification of barriers, where the research identifies specific respondent characteristics such as barriers to schooling and all that. Then we have gender inclusive strategies there. Recommendation, just look at least two. The government should develop and implement targeted education support programs such as the learning, giving these children accelerated learning so that they can learn from the streets while there. Then education financiers actors should design financial assistance programs to alleviate economic burden faced by families of non-street children. Then fourth, the government should invest in school infrastructure, transportation, and access to education in rural areas. Lastly, that the government should invest in schools to reduce the rate of dropout due to hunger at home among poor families. Thank you.
Thank you, Cyrus, for that presentation. And straight away, I'm going to invite Dr. Wekulo, who reviewed your work. Dr. Wekulo, karibu.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Cyrus Muhanga, for that presentation. Indeed, it's quite an interesting area of study. However, there are a few concerns here and there that, if not addressed, could what are your findings? And so to start us off, you're looking at the effects of respondents, that is in the title. Who are these respondents? Can the reader be able to tell whom you're referring to without going to read through the document? The respondents in the title, I personally find a problem. Maybe need to rework it so that if you're talking about the street children, let it come out clearly that you're looking at the effect of these street children's characteristics on their schooling and in that city or in that part of the country. So you need to clarify that. Or maybe respondent could mean could be a farmer, a teacher. What do you mean? And then you bring in among this one, which means you're making the responding to be independent variable. And therefore, my next question was, what can I be able to tell the IV and the DV from your title? Or maybe you will tell the IV and in the abstract, I think you need to also clarify by the respondent abstract. Looking at the purpose of the study, you say you're going to determine the effect of demographic characteristics of street children. Now that one, it makes it in what you have stated in the on schooling, but when you're presenting that is still in the abstract, you're referring to the chances of going back to the streets, away from the chances of going to. What is your DV again? Is it the chances of schooling affecting the children on schooling, or are they back to streets? So you have to decide on one. And in most cases, whatever we code as 0, that is schooling, not schooling 1, and that is what we refer to when we are talking, when we are in a logistic regression arena, and not any other way. So maybe you will also tell us you're interpreting your findings, chances of going back to street, instead of saying the likelihood of going to school. Then you are examining, you said you gave the questionnaires to the street children, and here it is not definite. In your presentation, you're saying, sorry, it was a typo. You are referring to the street children aged between 6 and 18. In your document, at some point, you're saying age 5 to 15. At some place, you're referring to them as age 5 to 15 and age 5 to 18. And in some place, you're saying you're comparing those in primary and those in secondary. So it's not clear. What is your comparative unit? What are your units of comparison? In most cases, when you're doing a comparative study or a design the way you've stated, you will look for your target or your sample should be similar in characteristics. And of course, your sample, when you're saying those going to school and those in street, we're already seeing a bias there. And there's no way you will ever compare those those on streets and those already in school. That is not a comparable population. You will maybe likely want to choose those street children in Nakuru and maybe street children in another location so that you can compare and see whether the characteristics you are referring to are playing a role across the board on these street children. But the way you're saying school and on street, that is not comparable. Then in the abstract, again, you're talking about you doing multiple regression in addition to the descriptive statistics that you presented. In the method section, it's a different thing. You're talking about binary logistic regression. The moment you say logistic regression, your dependent variable is already in a binary form. So you don't need to say a binary logistic regression. And you go on the method section, you're also talking of regression. We have linear regression, we have multiple regression, the way you've said in your abstract. So which is which? So with that alone, there was a lot of confusion on what exact model you did analyze. And also, the statistical model that you presented in method, we have some interference. I don't know where it's coming from. Well, the statistical model you presented in chapter 3, that is a regression model, a regression of a multiple regression model. And it's not a logistic model the way you purport to have conducted a logistic regression. At one point, you said you're going to do a comparative study. That is what you say in the abstract. But in chapter 3, it is just something else. We are not seeing you comparing the characteristics of those on streets and versus the characteristics of those not on streets. And again, you divert from focusing on schooling and you're talking of the chances of them going back to school. And then I was asking myself, what is the problem? Maybe you needed to look, besides just saying that the SDG 4 and 10, you needed to also to present, have these policies been implemented? And to what extent have these policies failed to attract and retain these children on streets in schools? And also maybe bring out the aspect of opportunity costs of these children staying on streets versus going to school. Without that, you just saying that, the number of students on streets are increasing and they are not, you said they are blocking the achievement of this SDG 4 and 10. That is not a problem. Maybe you will tell us what the problem is. And then the significance of the study, you probably need to look at the social justice contribution of your study to the immediate beneficiary. Don't look at the SDGs, the implementers of the SDGs or the policy makers up there, but how the immediate beneficiaries, the families and these street children going to benefit from your study. That is something that you need to really consider. The conceptual framework, some sections I'm skipping because those are minor observations and you'll read them from the report. The conceptual framework, you said, I'm asking, it's there, yes. How did you develop your conceptual framework? The conceptual framework is supposed to give us readers an overview, a picture of the variables that you're trying to relate and how they are affecting the whole system that you're talking about. And for you to come up with a conceptual framework, it must be based on some theories and some literature reviews. And I did not see, because what you presented as the theoretical framework to the study, it's kind of far-fetched. It's not related in any way with what you're presenting as the conceptual framework. So you need to link the two and say one of the section was developed from maybe this variable, that variable, and this one were derived from the theoretical framework. And the other variable in the conceptual framework were derived from the literature review. That is well understood. And just presenting a picture or a figure and letting, or you leave the readers to find out what is happening, it's not enough. You need to go further and explain what the direction of the arrows mean, what each variable will be measured, and so forth. About chapter 3, I've already talked about the design. You're actually looking at the correlational, not a comparative. The comparative is not coming out strongly. Maybe you can go read more about that, and if need be, do the necessary correction. The target population, I've mentioned about that. At some point, you're talking of 5 to 15 years old. And in the target population, again, you're talking of 5 to 18 years. And then in your presentation, you say that was a typo, you're saying is 6 to 18 years. Even though these are minors, I'm really interested in knowing how you provided or you gave them questionnaires to fill. There's a point you mentioned that they were filling in groups. But knowing that these are minors, you needed a consent for you to collect any form of information from them. I looked through the document, even the attachment, I didn't see the consent. How did you do that? Or how did you go about that? And then you targeted all the schools in Nakuru Township. I don't know for what reason. Why did you do that? Maybe you need to explain that to us. The comparison of those in school versus those not in school, we've talked about that. Besides questionnaire, you also said you gave out interview to the children administrators. How did you make use of the information derived from the interview? Don't say it was collaborating with the you needed to present the findings from the interviews separately. And if possible, you do the narrative. That is exact words that those people you interviewed said. So that later on you can do the comparison and not just hide under the term that I compared and it was similar to what I found. No, that is not allowed. Data collection procedures. I've mentioned about the surveys, which are you hiding the findings. They are not presented anywhere. data analysis. In the abstract, you said you're going to use the multiple regression. Here, you're saying in the method section, you're saying you used the binary logistic regression. So which is which? And at some point, you're also saying you used regression. Now, which regression? It's a bit confusing. And even you yourself, you owned up and said that the presentation, the analysis and interpretation of this logistic regression is difficult. That should not come from a researcher. Even if it's difficult, I'm sure you've consulted with your supervisor and those expert in the area, and you should not maybe present such negative words in your document. And so I'm still asking, so how did you interpret the findings from the findings of your analysis? And at some point, you're saying empirical results. What is that? Even if it's qualitative and it's done in a systematic way, in a quality way, it's supposed to be called empirical. So what do you mean by empirical results? And then when you're presenting the logistic regression findings, of course, with the logistic, I will quickly know that your dependent variable is binary. And so I will expect to see the odds ratio or OR and the boundary, that is the lower and the upper boundary, so that from there I can be able to tell whether they were on the same boundary, the positive or the negative. And there's something that I can read from there from the statistics arena. So with that, I found the presentation of the results in the table. The researcher said what did you say? Empirical results, table 1, table 2, they were not right. I expected to see the odds ratio and not the marginal effect. And then when you're presenting, of course, we have those control variables that you included in the model. And it's always good to name the models. For example, model 1, and then you put the variable that you ran, model 2. Even if you put 3, 4 models in the same table and you name them differently, model 1 up to 4, it will be easier for the reader to know what is it that is different from in model 2 that is missing in model 1, other than referring to every model you presented as binary model, binary model, binary model. There are 4 of them. So which binary model are you referring to? So I found a problem in the way you presented the logistic regressions, the finding. They are missing in a way. And so while like I said, in the logistic regression, you look at the likelihood. Your presentation should be in the form of likelihood, but the way you're presenting, your aim was to find the significance. It could be there, but when you find there's a positive relationship between, for example, the family or the age of the children and the chances of going to school, you say that is not a risk factor. But if there is a negative relationship, you talk of the risk factor. And you interpret in form of the likelihood and not the significant level alone. Maybe you need to, with the guidance of your supervisors, you need to relook at that and do proper presentation of chapter 4, which will also affect chapter 5 and also the interpretation of the findings. With that, say thank you and back to the chair.
Thank you, Dr. Wekulo, for that comprehensive report. Cyrus Muhanga, do you have some response to the issues raised?
Okay, thank you. I'm grateful for the response from Dr. Wekulo.